He accuses me of speaking like Khomeini. I think you see him here acting like him.
Okay, my turn. You couldn't have it more backwards. Free exercise means exactly the opposite of what you think it means. Free exercise gives a higher priority to freedom of conscience and freedom of thinking than it does to freedom of action. I can cite you 100 Supreme Court decisions to that effect. You love citing the Declaration of Independence, but you hate citing the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence is not the law. It is rhetoric. The preamble to the Constitution is not the law, it is rhetoric. The law is that no religious test shall be required, and you have told us in vague terms, but I think I understand you correctly, if you were president, you would violate the explicit terms of the Constitution by refusing to appoint to the Supreme Court somebody who didn't believe in God's law, namely an atheist. Now, one more point, please, and that is this. One more point, please. Let me finish. I let you finish. And that is, homosexual rights do mean the right of a homosexual to practice consensual sex in his bedroom. And I want to ask you this direct question. What would you do if there were two homosexuals who never left their bedrooms, never involved themselves in gay causes on the street, and the Boy Scouts, which receives much federal aid and state aid and uses public schools, etc., if the Boy Scouts asked them the question, are you homosexual? And because, you know, homosexuals are moral people and tell the truth and don't lie, they told the truth. And they said, yes, we practice homosexuality only in the privacy of our bedroom. Would you not disqualify them not only from the Boy Scouts, but from service on the Supreme Court and other high positions of government?
Do me a favor, don't put words in my mouth.
Well, put words in your own mouth.
The second question, excuse me. First of all, what you're trying to tell us then is that the Boy Scouts of America do not have the right to act on their religious views, that the free exercise of religion does not mean that we actually get to exercise religion. It gets to mean, I suppose, that we think about it, but that when we want to exercise it in a way that goes against the politically correct requirements of Mr. Dershowitz, we shall face the coercive force of law that will come down on our churches and our pulpits and our Christian youth associations, because that's what the Boy Scouts is, and will dictate.
Nobody ever told me it was a Christian organization when they invited me to join it.
Excuse me, and will dictate to us what shall be the content of that morality which corresponds to our religious conscience.
Okay.
I find this the most incredible instance of sort of doublespeak I've ever heard. We shall now have a First Amendment in which the free exercise of religion does not mean that you get to practice your religion. We shall now have a Constitution in which the rights of conscience mean that you shall be subject to government's brutal dictation in violation of your conscience. I know. And by the way, a few minutes ago, I don't understand where Mr. Dershowitz got the idea I had said anything uncomplimentary about him. I believe I praised and complimented him for the work that he did in the exculpation or whatever of O.J. Simpson. If he takes that as a derogatory remark, what does that tell you about his view of the whole case? But leave that aside. What I did at the time was simply to suggest that we couldn't rely on the same cleverness to get us out of bondage. And I would remind you of it again. When Mr. Dershowitz is dictating who shall be the scoutmasters, who shall teach in your youth organizations, who shall preach from your pulpits, who shall stand as examples of what you believe to be moral probity and God's decency, when Alan Dershowitz is dictating with his understanding of courts and coercion and civil rights, what shall be your religious practice? Please remember what I said, because it's quite obvious that when that comes around, he's not going to be using his legal talents to get you out of bondage. He is using every bit of his legal talent to put you in the bondage of his ideology.
Let me respond, please.
We're going to give... What?
I think the Boy Scouts of America are going to be pretty upset with that defense. We've heard tonight that the Boy Scouts of America are a Christian organization. In other words, we are told that the Boy Scouts of America could discriminate against the Jewish scoutmaster as well. Boy Scouts of America don't claim to be a Christian organization. I was a scout. I was a Boy Scout. I was a Cub Scout. My Orthodox Jewish father was a den master. Nobody told us it was a Christian organization at the time. It discovered it was a Christian organization when suddenly gays were being excluded, and it needed to find an after-the-fact justification. Look, any organization that wants to be a synagogue or a church or mosque can exclude anybody it wants, but don't ask for government aid. Churches don't come to schools
I'll tell you something.
and say, lend us your schools. Let me finish. Churches don't go to the federal government and say, stock our our ponds with trout. Churches, please let me finish. Churches don't come and mosques don't come to the federal government and demand that the President of the United States be the honorary president, as he is of the Boy Scouts, of various mosques and churches and synagogue. President Clinton is not the president of my synagogue. Last time I looked. We're not talking about imposing on you. We're talking about an organization which claims to stand for everything Americanism is about, for scouting, for moral values. And that's precisely why it's an abomination for an organization like the Boy Scouts to claim that they are moral and to still exclude gays and, under your principle, exclude Jews. I would just have one last point to make. Please.
I have a point to make.
Do not contribute to the Boy Scouts of America. Do not contribute. Withhold your support. If the United Fund includes Boy Scouts in your district, don't contribute to the United Fund. Withhold all support. Let's see if it's really a private sectarian organization.
You know what I find? Wait.
If you think your boos are going to scare me, you don't know me.
What I find fascinating about Alan's, what shall I call it, commentary, is that he stands before us using the term Christian as if it is somehow synonymous with exclusionary.
It is.
Hold on.
Excludes me, I'm not a Christian.
Excuse me, sir. You out of your own mouth have proven yourself to be a liar.
Oh, now
because
we're really getting into the gutter, right?
You just told us, didn't you, that you were not excluded because you were Jewish. And that is the truth of the matter. And a matter of fact, a lot of people know.
I was not excluded because it's not Christian.
Let me finish. Whether you're Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or whatever,
but not
in
gay.
A country that was founded on the Declaration principles, groups have come from all over the world to settle here precisely because they knew that America believes in God and therefore will not interfere with their religious freedom. And finally, if you're going to go on a tirade about the Boy Scouts,
yes,
I'll tell you this. Poor Girl Scouts succumbed to political correctness, have been on a slide ever since. The Boy Scouts have stood firm for the principles of moral conscience.
So is the Ku Klux Klan.
They are supposed to represent. They are not striving to discriminate on any basis except to say that they have the right to establish for themselves what shall be the positive principles of probity and character by which their organization will stand.
And the White Citizens Council discriminates only on one ground as well.
If you are going to tell me now that the American people must give up their rights of First Amendment conscience, must surrender the free exercise of religion every time they take $1 from the government or accept a politician in their midst, then we know what your plan is for us all.
That's right. My plan is private support for religion, no public support for religion. It's consistent. It's what the First Amendment says. I don't have to support your bigotry, sir.
Excuse me. All right.
You want to ask me any questions? I'm not afraid of your questions.
I didn't. Do we have a mic? Do I have a mic? Thank you. We'll be here forever. This is really kind of wonderful, isn't it? I'm a professor and a moderator. I'm not a lion tamer. However, We have some very interesting questions from the audience, and we'd like to ask them. We'll ask them one and the other in turn, and the answer gets roughly 2 minutes. Otherwise, we'll go here forever. Wonderful questions. Question for Mr. Dershowitz. What makes something right? That's the question.
It's a question I'm actually writing a book about. It's called Doing Rights. In my book, I reject natural law. I also reject simple legal positivism. Something is right, you have to struggle over that. It's very, very difficult. There are no simple-minded answers. It's not because God says so. Certainly, I don't hear the voice of God. I don't believe any human being has ever heard the voice of God. But what is right is very difficult. What's right is what experience has taught us over generations is right. In my book, I say, it's much easier to know what's wrong than to know what's right. We know what absolute evil is. We've seen it. We've seen it in the name of secularism, Nazism. We've seen it in the name of atheism, communism. We've seen it in the name of religion, the Inquisitions, and the Crusades. We know what evil is. We know what wrong is. Right is a process. Righting is a process of eternal search, beginning from the first human beings, moving through the Greek philosophers, through religious leaders, through civil leaders. I don't know what's right. I know what's wrong, but I have something else to tell you, folks. You don't know what's right. The minute you think you know what's right, the minute you think you have the answer to what's right, you have lost a very precious aspect of growing and developing. I don't expect ever to know precisely what's right, but I expect to devote the rest of my life to trying to find it out.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Keyes. When was the most recent instance, in your opinion, in which organized religion did provide an answer to a problem in American society?
I think that we're seeing a response from a lot of folks of faith. And by the way, you notice that I never use this phrase organized religion, because I'm not entirely sure what you mean, what you're talking about. Religion as an institution is one thing, but institutions in the end have to do with the faith and the ethics and the belief that they embody. And I am talking about the organic whole of that faith and belief as it translates into action. And I think the most recent example of a good effect has been the abstinence movement, in which after years of nonsense and lies from all these sex educationists teaching our children to do what we really didn't want them to do, we actually had folks stand up once again and say that in order to keep folks from having sex at an age they shouldn't, you need to fill their lives with a positive understanding of their responsibilities to parenthood and to family and to God. And I think that those movements which have had folks coming forward, taking the pledge when they're 14, gathering in great numbers in order to reinforce a sense that it is in fact cool to remain outside of sexual activity, and to do that in the light of prayer and God as part of a community of faith, I think it has had an enormous positive impact on oncoming generations, and we have yet to see the end of it, thank God, because it is still growing.
This will be a short question, a short answer. How can you advocate, Mr. Dershowitz, separation of church and state when this statement is not in the Constitution, but found only in a letter by Thomas Jefferson, which has been taken out of context?
I would advocate the separation of church and state even if the Constitution called for the merger of church and state. I don't get my views and my ideas from the Constitution. The Constitution is an interesting document, but my sense of right and wrong doesn't come from the Constitution. I would have opposed slavery even when the Constitution permitted slavery. I would have opposed women not being allowed to vote even when the Constitution forbade women from voting. So it's not a particularly wise question. How come I support the separation of church and state? I support the separation of church and state because it's the right thing to do. It was a great experiment. The only reason I'm here today is because of the separation of church and state. If we didn't have separation of church and state, as a Jew, I would not be a first-class citizen.